Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca Alvarado and I'm a graduate assistant with the Advanced Research and Curriculum. Welcome to our third video in our Grammar Refresher series. Today we will be talking about punctuation. This PowerPoint presentation was developed by the ARC graduate writing consultant, Franco Zamora. In this guide, we will cover sentence punctuation, commas, semicolons and colons, apostrophes, quotation marks, dashes, parentheses, and brackets. We will begin by talking about sentence punctuation. There are three standard punctuation marks which are used to end a sentence. These include the period, question mark, and exclamation mark. The period marks the end of a declarative sentence or imperative sentence. It may also appear on the inside of quotation marks. The question mark marks the end of an interrogative sentence or a sentence that asks a question. The exclamation mark gives the end of an exclamatory sentence or a sentence that expresses great emotion, such as excitement. Now that we've discussed sentence punctuation, we will discuss commas. The comma is one of the most common punctuations in the English language. Remember that commas create divisions between sections of sentences. This allows commas to act as a pause rather than a complete stop in a sentence. Commas can be used in many ways and are used in different parts of a sentence. Commas can be used to separate two independent clauses in a compound sentence, if a coordinating conjunction is also used. They can also be used to separate dependent clauses from their independent clause as needed. Commas can also be used to offset appositives or additional information, can separate lists of items in a sentence, and separate adjectives that all describe one noun, and may be used for emphasis depending on the context. These are all things to take into consideration when determining where a comma should go. Some sentences require a comma or commas to make the sentence mechanically correct. For example, commas are needed to separate independent clauses to form compound sentences with coordinating conjunctions. An example of this is I talked and I walked. Since you have two independent clauses connected by a coordinating conjunction here, a comma would be placed between them. Commas are also needed to combine compound adjectives that all describe one noun. An example of this is, can I have a piece of square, delicious, sweet cold cake? Commas are also needed to create a list. Oxford commas are used to clarify a list. An example of this is, I need gold, silver, and diamonds. Notice the Oxford comma after silver, which is placed to clarify the distinction between silver and diamonds. Commas are also required for offsetting appositives or extra information. An example is, my dentist, a former Bostonian, is a Red Sox fan. Notice how a former Bostonian is considered extra information in this case, because it's providing additional information about the subject that is not necessarily required, but is still helpful to know. Commas are also needed for offsetting long introductory dependent clauses from sentence subjects. An example of this is, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. Now let's practice placing commas in their correct location for the following examples. I went to the store and I bought groceries. Small, short-haired, brown-eyed, feisty chihuahuas are my favorite kind of dog. I went to the grocery store to buy bread, eggs, nuts, and seeds. George Washington, the first president of the United States, was born in present-day Virginia. Since it was so hot outside, she decided to wear sunscreen before going out. You can pause the video at this time to work on these examples. In our first example, the comma goes after store and before the coordinating conjunction and. This is because whenever you have two independent clauses separated by a coordinating conjunction, a comma should be placed before the coordinating conjunction to separate the two clauses. In our second example, commas should be placed between small and short-haired and brown-eyed and feisty. This is because whenever you have more than one adjective placed consecutively in a sentence that all describe the same noun, there should be commas separating each of these adjectives. In our third example, there should be commas between bread and eggs and nuts, and after nuts. These commas are necessary to separate the items in a list. Notice the Oxford comma after nuts to clarify that nuts and seeds are individual items and distinct from one another. Oxford commas are often used as the final comma in a list of items. In our fourth example, the comma goes between the first president of the United States, which is considered extra information in this sentence. In our fifth and final example, the comma goes after "since it was so hot outside." Here, the comma is needed to separate the dependent clause, which is introducing an idea in the sentence, from the independent clause. Semicolons are another type of punctuation mark. Semicolons are used to combine independent clauses to create compound sentences or compound complex sentences. Semicolons are a special kind of punctuation mark because they can combine sentences without additional help. In other words, semicolons are able to combine sentences without a conjunction. In fact, using a semicolon and a coordinating conjunction creates an error within a sentence. This makes semicolons a powerful punctuation mark for combining sentences. You will frequently see semicolons paired with subordinating conjunctions or conjunctive adverbs to create compound sentences. Some examples of semicolons include the following: I walk, semicolon, you walk. He was a skater boy, semicolon, she said see you later boy. I don't really buy much cheese, semicolon, however, I wouldn't say no to some. As a rule of thumb, only independent clauses that are directly related to each other should be combined together using semicolons. Semicolons can also be thought of as a kind of supercomma. This is because semicolons can be used to create divisions in a list of items, like commas. However, semicolons are only used when the items themselves use commas or are particularly long. Semicolons are rarely used this way, but this is still an acceptable way of using them. Here are two examples. I have visited these cities: Seattle, Washington; London, England; San Francisco, California; Austin, Texas; Portland, Oregon. Notice how the semicolons are used between every city and state to help the reader differentiate between them. Here is another example. He was responsible for developing a vaccine in the middle of a global pandemic, saving children from a raging forest wildfire, reading to elderly folks who have had no visitors, and baking delicious cookies. In this example, notice how the semicolons are used to create divisions between the list of items when the items are particularly long. Now let's try some semicolons practice. In the following examples, place the semicolons in their correct location. You may pause the video to work on these examples. In our first example, I love school, it brings me so much joy. The semicolon goes between the two independent clauses. Here, the semicolon is being used to connect independent clauses that are related to each other. Our second example reads, I'm always worried I'll run into the person who broke my heart many times, left me alone in the scorching desert, dropped and broke my phone, even if it was an accident, and always ignored me around close friends. As you can see, this sentence contains a list of items, and one of those items contains a comma. So, to accommodate for this, rather than using a comma to separate the list of items, a semicolon would be more appropriate. Colons are another type of punctuation mark used within a sentence. Colons usually signal information or can be used to establish a list. Here is an example of how to use a colon to establish a list. I only like 3 kinds of ice cream: chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. Notice how the colon is separating an independent clause from the list itself. In addition, colons can be used to introduce a quotation that acts as a self-contained independence clause. An example is, I always think of what my father used to say. In this example, the colon is signaling the information that follows the independent clause. In the case that you have 2 independent clauses where the second clause is used for emphasis and is directly related to the first sentence, it's more common to use a semicolon. For example, in "That's not a boulder, it's a rock," the first independent clause is related to the second independent clause, which is used for emphasis. Thus, a semicolon would be used here rather than a colon. Just as there are times when colons are needed, there are also times when colons are not needed. If a colon would be used to separate a noun from a verb from an object, or a preposition from an object, the colon should be left out. The following examples show some common ways in which colons might be used incorrectly. I like iced, hot, and lukewarm coffee. This is incorrect because the colon is separating the verb like from the noun coffee. The rare rainbow fish is said to be fake. This is also incorrect because the colon is separating the object fish from the verb is. I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts, crab cakes, rocks, etc. This final example is also incorrect because the preposition of is being separated from the objects coconuts, crab cakes, and rocks. Careful when using colons to avoid these common pitfalls. Now let's practice by determining when colons should be used in a sentence. In the following examples, identify whether the colon is needed. I'm taking 3 classes this semester: English, Biology, and History. This year, the actresses will be touring in Seattle, Boston, and New York. You're not a good writer, you're a great writer. You may pause the video at this time to work out these examples. In our first example, the colon is needed. The colon is being used to address a list. In our second example, the colon is not needed. The colon is separating a preposition from an object, which creates an error. In our final example, the colon is also not needed. The colon is separating 2 independent clauses, where the second clause is used for emphasis and is related to the first sentence. Therefore, a semicolon would be more fitting in this case. There are 3 basic functions of an apostrophe. One basic function of an apostrophe is to combine words to form contractions. Usually, academic writing will discourage the use of contractions since they may be considered informal. However, they are used as needed. Can't is one example of a contraction since it stands for cannot and uses an apostrophe to combine the words. I'm is also another example of a contraction and stands for I am. Y'all is yet another contraction that stands for you all. Apostrophes can also be used to establish possessiveness in words. In addition, they can be used in place of quotation marks when quotations occur within quotations. Usually, this happens when you quote someone else quoting someone else. There are 2 kinds of possessive apostrophes, singular and plural. Singular possessive apostrophes are possessives that are the object of a single noun or singular noun group. For singular possessive apostrophes, the apostrophe goes before the s. An example is my mother's daughter. The possessive is daughter since it belongs to the single noun mother. Therefore, the apostrophe s would go after mother. Another example is the king's speech. Since the speech belongs to the king, the apostrophe s would go after king. In Children's Day, children is already plural, so an apostrophe s would be added after it. Plural possessives are the object of a plural noun. For plural possessive, the apostrophe s would go after the s. In the bikers club, the apostrophe would be added after the s since the club belongs to many bikers. In the hands rings, the apostrophe would be added after the s because the ring belongs to many hands. Another example is the American's voice, which suggests that the voice belongs to many Americans. When a possessive occurs at the end of a word that already ends in the letter S, especially if the word is a proper noun, the standard rules generally apply. The Morales' family dog indicates that the dog belongs to the entire Morales family. Mike Morales' dog indicates that the dog belongs to only Mike Morales. The mess's grossness indicates that the grossness belongs to one mess only. The mess's grossness indicates that the grossness belongs to all the messes. All the fish's fins indicates that the fins belong to all the fish, which is already plural. All the witch's cats indicates that the cats belong to several witches. Now, can you identify which sentences contain plural and singular possessive apostrophes? You may pause the video at this time to work on these examples. The first example contains a plural possessive because the dog belongs to the entire Morales family. This is denoted with an S apostrophe. The second example contains a singular possessive because the dog belongs to the singular Mike Morales. The third example contains a singular possessive because the grossness belongs to one mess. The fourth example contains a plural possessive because the grossness belongs to all the messes. The fifth example contains a plural possessive because the fins belong to all the fish, which is already plural. The final example is also plural possessive because the cats belong to the plural witches. Now let's practice placing apostrophes in their correct location. All 5 of my athlete brothers' soccer cleats were soiled by the mud. The purse was left unguarded, so someone could have stolen it. Lucas's dog is the cutest thing I've ever seen. You may pause the video at this time to practice these. In this first example, the apostrophe goes after the S in brothers because the soccer cleats belong to multiple brothers, hence why the apostrophe is called a possessive. In the second example, the apostrophe goes between lady and the S because lady is singular, and the purse belongs to the lady. In the final example, the apostrophe goes between the two S's in Lucas because the dog belongs to Lucas. Now let's talk about quotation marks. Quotation marks denote a place in a text where you are directly referencing words from someone else. There are many ways to use quotation marks, but there are 2 ways that they might be used in higher academic courses. The first way is by using direct quotes, and the second way is by using embedded quotes. Direct quotes are the first way you might use quotation marks. Direct quotes directly reference another's words using either a dialogue tag, such as the words said, shouted, questioned, asked, etc., or a punctuation mark. One example of this is she said, "Don't let it go to your head." This first example uses a dialogue tag to reference someone else's words. Another example of a direct quote is, "It's like my grandpa always said, time is money." This is an example of a direct quote using a punctuation mark, in this case a colon, to reference someone else's words. Embedded quotes are another way quotation marks are useful. Embedded quotes directly reference another person's words and embed them as a natural part of the sentence. Therefore, only quotation marks with no additional punctuation are used. An example of this is, Mr. Clark was interested in any sufficiently advanced technology in lieu of magic. Notice how the embedded quote seamlessly flows with the rest of the sentence. A simple way to use embedded quotes is by starting a sentence with your own words, adding the author's words, then ending the sentence with your words. This will help embed a quote into your writing. Just remember to include quotation marks around the author's words and to cite the author. Now let's discuss dashes. Dashes come in two forms: N dashes, which are short dashes, and M dashes, which are long dashes. N dashes, or short dashes, are different from hyphens. N dashes are created on most word processing keyboards by typing a single dash or hyphen after a space, followed by another space. N dashes are useful to mark ranges, such as with time. For these ranges, the dash can be read aloud as to or through. Sometimes no space is used. The following are some examples of instances in which N dashes would be useful. 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., rooms 9 through 19, 2019 to 2020 school year. Hyphens are another type of N dash that is used for words that go together. Hyphenated words never have a space between them. Hyphens do not read as to or through as N dashes do. Some examples include Mexican American, right-handed, and 10-year-old boy. An M dash is created on most word processing keyboards by typing two dashes immediately after a word, followed by another word without spaces. This will automatically produce a long dash once an additional space on the sidebar is used. M dashes may be used for emphasis, to establish a list, or to establish an interruption in the sentence. Some examples are listed below. I never said I wanted chocolate milk. I said I wanted a latte. The factory, the one at the edge of town, is best avoided. Dr. Calvin established the school of thought we use today and will probably use 20 years from now. As we've seen so far, M dashes can serve a variety of purposes. M dashes can offset appositives, combine clauses, and more. However, while they are useful, their use should be carefully considered because they are mainly stylistic as opposed to professionally academic. N dashes and M dashes can sometimes be used in place of each other. Hyphens, on the other hand, are always one dash and always between words. Remember the differences between N dashes, M dashes, and hyphens to improve how you interpret words and sentences as a reader. Parentheses and brackets are two other punctuation marks used within sentences, particularly when citing in text and using other referencing styles. Since there are so many different kinds of referencing styles, this guide will not be covering those specific rules. You may check out our other guides or other sources for more information on that. So what are parentheses and brackets? Parentheses are commonly used to enclose or offset extra or unnecessary information. Brackets, on the other hand, can sometimes take the place of parentheses when there is a need to put parentheses within parentheses. An example of this is as follows. Their plane departed this morning, open parentheses, from Seatrack Airport, open brackets, SEA, close brackets, close parentheses. Notice how the brackets were used to enclose information within the parentheses. Here are some examples of sentences using parentheses. I went to the near coffee shop. She went to the hospital, something she hated doing, just to see her brother. The Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which was put off, was going to be big. Notice how in each of these examples, the parentheses are enclosing extra information that is not necessarily needed in the sentence, but is still useful for the reader to know. Note that just like em dashes, parentheses can be used for many purposes, but their use should be carefully considered as they are usually more ornamental and stylistic than actually professional or academic. Similar to, but still different from parentheses, are brackets. In academic writing, brackets are probably the most commonly used to explain something further, to correct something, or comment within another author's direct quotation. To add content or correct something within a quotation, brackets may be used to enclose the corrected information. Here is one example. The doctor says it is most likely an ankle sprain. Here, ankle is in brackets because the original sentence likely either left that out or used a vaguer term. Brackets can also be used to explain or translate something. Here is an example. My Spanish teacher asked, ¿Por qué llegas tarde? Why are you late? Notice how a translation was placed in brackets for clarification. Brackets may also be used to comment on an error within a quote. For example, the Vice President wrote, "May our nation continue to be the beacon of hope to the world." Here, the Latin word "sic" means "thus so," and indicates that the word before the brackets are the exact copy from the original quotation but are somehow questionable or a possible error. Another use of brackets are to demonstrate an altered word in a quote. Depending on the context of the sentence, brackets may be used to alter a quote as needed to make the sentence grammatically correct. Take a look at this altered quotation and the original sentence. In this altered quotation, the word ski has been altered so that the sentence reads smoothly with the embedded quote. While academic writers might find it useful to make changes, additions, and substitutions to direct quotes using brackets as needed, you may not alter another author's words in any way that is unfairly or inaccurately represents the original meaning. Knowing the rules of brackets, parentheses, and all other punctuation marks will help pave the way to better understand an author's meaning as a reader and improve the clarity of your sentences as a writer. For additional assistance, see TAMIU ARC's other great guides. Thanks for watching and see you next time for the fourth and final part of our Grammar Refresher series.